Hey mom, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Lindsay. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I just finished up a marathon of weddings. We had 3 weddings, 3 weekends in a row. So I am hydrating first and sleeping and getting my sea legs of non wedding life back to me. It's going to be quite the transition this weekend to just sit on my couch.
Question is if all these weddings made you rethink what you're planning, is the question, right?
A little, but they were all absolutely beautiful in their own right. So, super happy that we got invited to them and got to celebrate some of our friends and see some of our friends we haven't seen since college. It was really fun.
Yeah, I like that. I like some of the special touches that you shared that some people did, at least the most recent wedding, which was very cool.
Yeah, it
So,
was so cute. So we sat down at our there were like assigned seats and we had little cookies in front of us, but no one else had little cookies. And ours said, "You're next." So it was a little champagne bottle that said, "You're next" on the cookie. And we had other friends there who were also engaged and they also had the cookie. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're totally doing this somehow at our wedding for our friends. Hopefully they don't listen to this podcast, but whatever. I don't think any of them do. But it was really adorable and it was super fun. So it was a great time. But so today I want to take us back to the basics a little bit. I want to go back to ground level. So maybe some of our usual listeners, this is going to be, a refresh for them. But what really started Agency Focus was valuation reports. And one thing that I've noticed as I've been working more and more with agency owners is some agency owners just love insurance. They love to write insurance. They don't love being business owners. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the fact of what some independent insurance agency owners have in their toolbox. And so when it comes time to exit or comes time to do this or that, they may not know what resource to turn to, right? There's no guidebook. I'm sure there is a guidebook out there somewhere, but in life, right, there's no guidebook for this. So today I really want to break down what is a valuation, why would someone get a valuation, what is all included in a valuation, what does it tell you, and what does it take in order to do it. So I really want to dive deep into valuation overall and give our listeners kind of that first level view of it. How does that sound?
I would love to talk about it. I think the more people that gain an understanding of how to get a health check on your agency, the better off they will be as business owners. And honestly, the more opportunity they will have or options they will have when they're faced with the decision to either exit, to transition to the next generation, or to potentially acquire another agency. So I love, let's dive in. You take me wherever you want me to go, and I will follow your lead, my friend.
Sounds good. So to kick it off, I'd love to hear a little bit, maybe even background of like first valuation you did. Like what is a valuation report and how is it created?
Yeah. So I've been doing valuations for about 9 years now. It was, something I absolutely love doing. It gives you a complete and total view of your agency and all the factors, the strengths and the weaknesses, and puts it in a numeric form to say, this is the fair market value of what your agency could expect today. A fair market value, when we create the report, is really meant to be the internal valuation of an agency, not what an external agency would pay you. And the reason I want to make this distinction is everything in the news today will talk about what the multiples are for agencies. And when you see a multiple that is published, they're talking about one agency buying another or a private equity firm buying an agency. And that is an external number. But when you do a valuation, you're actually looking at what is the expectation of the ongoing operation of this agency if ownership were to change, and all that changes is you are now no longer the owner and someone else is, not that you combined it with another agency. So that is considered an internal number, not an external number. And the reason that's important to talk about is because if you get a valuation, the person valuing your agency can't possibly know what the synergies are between the buying entity and your agency in order to quantify what that would do to the profitability, what that would do to the value, combined value. So when you get a valuation, it is meant to be the floor, and everything else from there either builds or takes away from that floor expectation of what your agency is worth. So most cases, if there's an external buyer, you could combine locations, you could combine staff, you will combine your books of business. If you have carrier overlap, that would potentially put you in the running for additional contingencies with carriers that you might have or not qualified for prior. So again, none of those synergies are in evaluation. What could cause it to go less than an internal valuation is if no synergies exist. So if a potential buyer is someone who's located across the country, different footprint, different carriers, and really you're going to operate it completely separate, you'd be closer to the internal valuation for that type of buyer, simply because there are not a lot of synergies in order to quantify there. So really important to give agents an idea of what should I expect, not what do I think it is or what did the person down the road get, but what are the factors based on my agencies? What could I expect in this current market for evaluation? That's what this report will tell you.
Got it. So it is truly just about the agency itself internally. And one thing I want to ask a question on, you said it would be for an acquisition if, so say like, there's a son coming up buying the father out or a daughter coming up buying the mother out. That would still be internal, right? So that would be the cost for it. It's not two agencies merging together.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, got
That
it.
is correct.
Good distinction. I'm glad you pointed that out. Okay, so that's what a valuation is. It's what it tells you. Now walk me through, what are all of the different parts of a valuation report? Does it tell, like, is it broken up into sections? What can they expect when they receive the report back?
Sure. So the valuation is broken into sections. First, we have to identify why we're doing the valuation. So we say certain assumptions that apply to the valuation. For instance, if an agency is no longer going to be in operations, let's say there is a divorce and we're doing a valuation because the agency is going to be liquidated. It's no longer going to happen. That is not a going concern. So we have to say the assumptions that we're placing on this business in order to complete this valuation. 99.9% of the valuations that I've completed is considered a going concern, meaning we expect this agency to continue. We then talk about the assumptions that we apply to the valuation, that it is a hypothetical buyer and seller, that no one's under any compulsion to buy or sell, that it is a strategic buyer. I'm sorry, it's a financial buyer, not a strategic buyer, which is really talking to those synergies. None of those synergies are being contemplated. And then we talk about what information was collected in order to complete the valuation. The valuations that we provide for agencies are either done as a multiple of EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, or a multiple of revenue if it is a smaller agency where EBITDA multiple doesn't make sense. So we will have a section about their financials and any adjustments that were made to the financials in order to get to a pro forma EBITDA. Pro forma just means what is a very likely ongoing assumptions for the agency, how they could operate. And that's based on the agency's trends, removing any one-time expenses or one-time revenue, and also using industry benchmarks to say what's a reasonable expectation of how the agency could run so we can get that operating profit or EBITDA that is realistic and expected based on industry and the agency. So that's one piece of the equation, and you'll have a section about that. And then the next section is, what are some of the risk factors that helps us determine what that multiple is to apply to your EBITDA or to that revenue number. And we will go through what those different risk factors are specific for your agency, whether it's a strength inside your agency, whether there are opportunities to improve your agency and remove some risk. And to me, that's actually the most important part of the report, are those opportunities to say, here's where you are today, and here's some things you could do to strengthen your agency and strengthen your value, or here's some ways to look at your business and potentially de-risk it or invest in different ways in order to maximize that value. So that's section number 4. And then section number 5 is the valuation. So we'll give you what that range of value is. We'll also, depending on the size of the agency, give you some perspective on what a potential buyout would look like given the current interest rate market. So could a bank loan actually be utilized for this valuation in this market? And for larger agencies, we might put what some external multiples look like as well, just to give you a frame of reference. The last part of the report is, some about me, who's the author, how long I've been in the industry, what my credentials are, and a glossary of terms, hopefully to make it as easy as possible for someone to read the report and interpret and be able to go back to it as a resource. It shouldn't be flip to the number and that's the only thing you read. It's more about the description of the agency and the potential things you could do. And so we try and write it in a way that it's not a lot of financial terms that nobody understands. And if we had to use some of those terms, we put the glossary in there so you can understand what we're talking about.
Nice, nice. So it seems like someone would really, for the most part, comes to agency focus to get a valuation when they're selling or when there is a transfer of ownership happening. But is there a time, like I know some agencies have it written into their bylaws that they need to get valuations continuously? Is that something that you also see a lot, or would you recommend that agencies do that?
Yeah, it's a super great question. And actually, when I started doing valuations for agencies, the thought process was the only time you would get a valuation is if you were getting ready to sell. In fact, it's a funny story. I used to travel around, and prior to COVID, you really didn't deliver a valuation report that wasn't in person. Like I would literally drive to their agencies, sit down and go over the report with them. And I loved, I mean, honestly, it was one of my favorite things being face to face with agents. Like I genuinely wanted to be in that room and be able to see the body language, just, be in person. So I would also want to take a picture saying, hey, I was here, and post it and say, hey, listen, we were able to visit so many agencies. And some of them would ask me not to. They basically said,
Mm,
I don't want to be seen with you because I don't want people to think I'm selling. Nothing could be further than the truth. I think one of the biggest fallacies is thinking you don't want to get a valuation unless you're thinking of selling. I think anyone who runs a business should get what their baseline is and check it every 3 years to see, is it improving? Have I moved the needle? What's happening in the market? The only reason I would tell you to do it more often than 3 years is, number one, if you're in the middle of a transition, or number two, if you buy an agency or sell a book of business or do something significant in your business, you should get that health check again. But we do all kinds of things in our lives. We go to the doctor every year to get a health check. Well, most of us do. I'm not sure that I can say that for everyone in my family, but listen, we we are meant to see a doctor every year and make sure that we're keeping up and being as healthy as we can. We do the same thing for our cars and we get them tuned. You get your heating and cooling equipment inside your house checked every single year. Why on earth would you not check your business, whether you're buying or selling? Just know where it is in order to be a better leader and make better decisions about your agency. So honestly, that was one of the reasons we priced the valuation the way that we did, to make it a business planning tool, not
Mhm.
something you're only going to do once in your career. When I entered this space, there were people that did valuations, but it was somewhere in the range of $8,000 to $10,000 in order to obtain a valuation of your agency. We are far less than that. Our valuation is priced so you can do it every single year as a health checkup, or at least at a minimum every 3 years in order to get a health checkup. So that is a fallacy. I think that the agents that get a valuation and take the insights and work on their business are far better positioned when they are faced with a decision to buy or sell or transition than those that are not, and it's money well spent.
So what do agencies do in those middle 3 years? Does it have advice of you should work on this? Do
Yes.
you recommend that they find an accountability or a mastermind group or something? Are those types of resources in there for them? Or how do they go about making their plan once they have the valuation in hand?
It's funny, Lindsay. It's a very personal thing. So if you think about it, an agency, there are common threads for an agency. Number one, your people are your biggest asset and they're also your largest expense. So oftentimes, how you compensate your people can be a key takeaway from evaluation. So it might be, I need to work on my compensation plans, or I need to think about who I'm hiring, the roles that I'm hiring, the capacity on my team in order to get in line with what industry averages are versus where I am. It could also be your growth rate is far greater than any other agency, but your staffing is not. So
Mm.
maybe you might be burning out your agents and not have a clue. In the middle of a hard market, there's a lot of people that feel like they're being burnt out. But you now have data to say, actually, they're handling more work than the average agency. Maybe this is time to either invest in technology, tier your clients, or hire in order to help with that. So the takeaways are very personal. And typically, that's where the conversation when we review evaluation are focused around. Another big area is carrier concentration and what your strategy is with your carriers, your network relationships, all of those things is a takeaway because in a soft market, it's less important, but in a hard market where placing business becomes difficult, you could really use some benchmarks to say, how much should I have with my lead carrier? How exposed am I based on the book of business that I'm writing with the partners that I've chosen? And should I start making different decisions? Areas of concentration like with your customers and your producers. Big takeaway. You might not have realized that 90% of your new business is coming from two people that are nearing retirement age, and what should you do to round that out? Or 40% of your book of business is being managed by someone who's going to retire in the next 2 years. And oh, by the way, the two account managers that work with them might retire before them. Like,
Oh.
the body of knowledge is going to exit. That is a
Mhm.
huge risk factor, even though, your growth numbers are great, your profitability numbers are great. The transferability of that agency is far different than an agency that has some generational health. So I don't know about a mastermind. I think the awareness of those insights and putting a plan in place in order to tackle those biggest risk factors can be incredibly beneficial for an agency owner. And Sometimes that means joining other agents that are trying to deal with the same stuff, or it could
Mhm.
be it goes on my annual goals. Like I need to focus on this as a leader and then check to see have I moved the needle enough. So, but no, it's actually a good idea. Maybe I should put resources in there to say, here's some ways that you can be held accountable in order to do that. People reach out to us to have their valuation redone often because they want to know, have I moved the needle and I might be nearing the end. As closer as you get, the more you want to know, have I positioned myself the right way? Yeah.
Cool. So when agencies come to you and they want a valuation, there is so much data in an agency that can be tapped into. Obviously, the more data, the better, probably. I guess I shouldn't say obviously, but I guess I'm going to put an assumption into the world that the more data that they can give you, the better. But what are like kind of the key, most important things that they give you in order to get it done?
Yeah. So we start with 5 years of financials. We want your profit and loss statement for 5 years, your most recent balance sheet. We typically do a valuation based on year end or the agency's, year end. It might not be calendar year, but whatever the fiscal period is for the agency. We want your current staff listing, their compensation structure, and their total compensation. We would like a book of business report that is listed by revenue, by premium, by carrier, by line of business, and the person responsible for those accounts. And we want carrier reports for where you place at least 80% of your business. And then we ask the agency a series of questions. Are you part of a network, cluster, or alliance? Do you have an operating agreement? Do you have a perpetuation plan? Describe your technology that's utilized. Describe your sales and service inside your agency. Describe your how you get new business. What are the lead sources for new business inside the agency? Those kinds of questions. And then we schedule a call and talk to the agency about these things. Numbers can only tell you so much. You need to gain an understanding of the story behind the numbers. And honestly, Lindsay, it sounds like a lot of data. It really does. Like financial statements are usually very, very easy for an agency to generate. Even the book of business, we want an Excel or CSV file so we can look at areas of concentration by carrier, by account, by line of business, by customer, like all these different ways. Otherwise, I have to ask you each and every one of those questions if I can't get the complete book of
Mm.
business report. Where agents struggle is if they're paper based and they don't use an agency management system, or their agency management system is not utilized in a way where they can run a report this way, it becomes super labor intensive. But it's also really good to figure that out years before you want to transfer, because if you wait until you want to sell and you struggle to provide that kind of information, or you even wait to before you want to acquire and you struggle to provide that information to the bank, you're going to slow it down and not have as many options available to you. So sometimes it's just going through the process and getting all of that in order is beneficial in and of itself.
Mm.
And I will tell you, one of the initiatives on our team right now is to ease the friction and the burden of that data collection. Really telling people exactly what report to run inside their AMS system in order to provide that to us, and minimizing the time that it takes for someone to generate this, or allowing us to get on a call and help you do it so it's less intimidating. That's the time and the I think one of the reasons people hesitate to do things like a will or a trust or whatever is they think it's going to be so time consuming. Well, this sounds like a time consuming thing as well, and we're trying to make it as little time as possible for someone to plan for this. So that's really the data that we need. And then typically it takes about 3 weeks once we have your last bit of data to generate the report and schedule a time to go over it with our clients.
Gotcha. One of the things I guess I didn't necessarily realize about valuation reports is they're kind of subjective, right? Like if you went to 3 different places and got 3 different valuations, they may all be different based on the different aspects that they look at, the information that you give them. I never really thought of it like that before. I guess I just thought like, here's the value of your agency in a box. Here you go. It's going to be the same from everywhere. Do you have a lot of agencies who get multiple different valuations?
When there's a purchase in place, sometimes the seller side and the buyer side will both get their own valuation expert in that process. And I will tell you, if you have someone that's doing the work that understands this industry, they should be in the same range. Where it varies is when
Mm.
someone goes to a local accountant and says, "Hey, value my agency for me." And sadly, the only data that that accountant's going to compare to is best practices agencies. And if the agency isn't best practice, they're going to be completely off. Or they'll apply a multiple that is, for platform agencies that are 5 million or, uh, very, very large to an agency that's 500 in revenue because they don't have any other data and they don't have an understanding of the industry. The last thing they'll do is maybe grossly undervalue it because they're using a valuation method that doesn't work for an independent agent. There are some companies where the value really sits on the balance sheet in inventory. We don't have a tangible product that would be sitting as inventory on our balance sheet. And if you don't understand and you apply the same logic to all kinds of different businesses, you can have a grossly undervalued agency just because someone doesn't understand it.
Mm.
Um, the other part is that goes for just not just valuation, but even accountants that are working with agents that don't understand holding money in trust for carriers. Like you've got to deal with people that understand your business if you want to get good service and good reports about your business. So, yeah, there's sometimes that I have someone come and say, this person. A local accountant did a valuation on my agency and I'm disputing it. Can you please interpret this and tell me why they're so vastly different?
Mm.
So it's unfortunate, but I think when you use a local accountant, you tend to think that they know enough in order to do this, and sometimes it's just not true.
Does the local accountant normally swing high or swing low?
It depends if they are using best practices and applying it to a small agency. It could be super super high, and if they're applying, asset method rather than a multiple of EBITDA, it just can be widely off, and it could be grossly under. So yeah.
Gotcha. Well, very good. Thank you for that overview. It definitely helped me understand what valuations are, why they're important, when you should get them, all of those things. Do you think that there's anything that you wish agencies knew about valuations that we didn't get to?
So I would just challenge this because there's a lot of people that like to talk. We are in an industry where agents are so willing to share with each other, which I love. It's actually a strength of our industry. But in some cases, it can be dangerous to base your information on what someone else has done. For instance, an agency down the street bought an agency that was roughly 1 million in revenue and they did it for 2.5 times. Assuming that 2.5 times revenue applies to all $1 million agencies is actually super dangerous. And you have to go deeper than one number in order to know what is fair to offer and what is fair to expect for an agency. I'll leave you with the easiest way to think about it. If I could change one thing, is that rule of thumb would go away and people would look at agencies for what the strengths and weaknesses are for each agency. But $1 million agency that has no account that makes up more than 2% of the total revenue is very, very low risk from that one factor. Same agency, $1 million agency that has one account that makes up 40% of their book. You would never dream in a million years to pay the same amount or pay in the same structure for
Mm.
those two agencies, given the fact that that one account creates a risk that could be super detrimental for the buyer if that account was lost. Just remember that's one of 27 different risk factors. Take that and multiply it times 27, and that's how varied that an agency's value can be. If your risk factor is positive or negative, your multiple is not reasonable to think that it will be in the same range. So please, please, please take the time to learn so you make good purchases and you also have the right expectation for your own agency.
Maybe that needs to be our next solo episode with the 27 different risk factors and breaking them down.
I could do it.
Well, maybe that'll be our next one. I love that idea. And I think it'd be a good follow-up to this conversation too. So everybody listening, see you next time for 27 risk factors. Thanks for tuning in.
How'd we do?